really cars are becoming computers on wheels. There are autonomous vehicles, there's micro-mobility, there's a shift in aviation with personal aviation devices, whether they're man-sized drones or air taxis, or they're even small drones that are used for package delivery or anything else. There's a real shift across the board, which is really exciting. And so one of the things that I always get hisses and scoffs at state legislatures or something when I'm invited to speak, because I say at the outset, I'm not an EV evangelist. I'm not going to tell you that EV is the right technology for every use case, because it's just not. And so anybody that would have said, for example, GM a year ago or 2 years ago or 3 years ago that said, we're going to go 100% electric, I would have said, well, that's pretty aggressive. Let's commit to modernizing systems and see where the marketplace takes us.
Welcome to the Dov Baron Show. Come for the stories, stay for the learning. I'm your host, Dov Baron. I consult with and guide businesses, teams, and very high-performing leaders in how to harness their emotional source code to move their tribe. Let me ask you, are you playing it safe? Or are you driven to redefine the game? Welcome to the Dov Baron Show, where we unmask the hidden truths of high-profile leaders and dissect the guts and the glory of those who dare to lead through transformation. Today, I'm joined by Andrew Hisey. He is the president and CEO of GoStation. Andrew is at the forefront of the seismic shifts in technology that are reshaping our future in mobility and energy. He's not just developing software, he's pioneering the operating systems that will power our sustainable future. Tap into our community of deeply curious learners by hitting that subscribe button right now. This isn't just another podcast, it's our exploration into the minds of those who are shaping the world. Every episode is raw, unscripted, and a collaboration between my guests and myself as we dive into the truths few dare to ask about. We find our guests, and they usually tend to be a little unknown to the general public, but they are absolute titans in their fields. These are the kind of people that high-profile leaders turn to when they need an edge. If you're the kind of leader who craves depth over sound bites, hit the subscribe button, because this is where real thinkers come to sharpen their edge. For the next 2 episodes, as I said, we're joined by Andrew Hisey as we dissect what fuels the fires of innovation and innovators like Andrew. He'll explain why some choose the exhilarating path of risk and invention and others choose, well, comfort and conformity. With a career that spanned from finances to motorsports and strategic business consulting, Andrew says it's not just about finding success, it's about rediscovering the fun of the entrepreneurial journey. So, ladies and gentlemen, turn up the volume and help me to welcome President and CEO of GoStation, Andrew Hisey. Welcome, sir.
Thank you, Dov. Pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me.
It's my pleasure, man. I'm looking forward to our conversation because this is very contemporary. I mean, it's really what's going on. But before we get on to what is now and what is contemporary, I always like to start the show with talking about context. What's the emotional source code that gives us the context, the building blocks of your history, of your character, that reveals the person you become? Because nobody started out as who they become. So talk to us a little bit about your formative experiences.
Yeah, well, interesting you say that, because my reaction is that I'm not fully formed. I'm constantly learning and growing and pushing into discomfort. Something you said in your intro really resonated with me. And in fact, I can't take credit, but it's a slogan for a company that speaks to my motorsports roots. It's called Go Fast, Don't Die. And one of their slogans is comfort is a slow death. And I really believe that. And I think my emotional source code is really all about pushing into that discomfort, into that unknown, and having some maybe naive beliefs that it can be done, and whatever it is. I'm not going to say it can't till at least I try.
Does that come from your childhood?
Yeah, it does. I think in good and bad ways. I think I was taught that particularly by my father and my grandfather. Doesn't always work out, by the way. That pathway is littered with failures and regrets and things like that. But it's not how many times you get knocked down. It's how many times you get up. I try to live by that sort of code.
Well, I kind of understand that as a man who was a full-blown adrenaline junkie and fell 120 feet while free climbing. I kind of understand that. It doesn't always work out well. What's more important, though, is to understand what's driving it. And so let me ask you, what is it that gives your life meaning? What is it that wakes you up in the morning and gives you meaning, real meaning?
I think it's living but on my own terms. And a lot of that has to do with my family, my wife and my son. And a lot of it has to do with building a future that we can be proud of when we look back on it. A lot of it is those philosophical things. It's not necessarily monetary success. Those things come when you go out and risk something and achieve. I'm really driven by tackling things. That really gives me a lot of excitement every morning.
You talked about motorsports being sort of your roots, and we're getting to the evolution of that in a moment. But was that something from childhood, or is that something that came in later?
The source of it was my grandfather. My grandfather was from Terre Haute, Indiana, which is a little town in Indiana that's not known for much other than maybe Hoosier basketball. It's where Larry Bird was from and went to college. But it was also home to a company called the Holman Company, which nobody should know, but they manufactured Clabber Girl baking powder, still do, and distributed all over the Midwest. My grandfather was an accountant for them. His boss, Tony Holman, bought the Indianapolis Motor Speedway in 1945, right after the Second World War. The race hadn't been run for a few years. It was derelict. Everybody that would have been racing in that, or a mechanic or engineer, so on and so forth, were fighting the war effort. And so really my exposure to motorsports goes back to that, and my grandfather's exposure to the Holman Company and the rebuilding of that facility and the tradition that has become the Indy 500.
Wow, that's really interesting. So for you, it has a familial hook, a place to go in. And now we're in finances, you're in motorsports, consulting, and with what you're doing now in renewable energy. Talk to us a little bit about what it is you do now, because I think there's a lot of misunderstanding about what it is that you do. And then we're going to go in depth with that.
Yeah. So what we do at GoStation is ostensibly we're an EV charging technology company. So when people hear that, they think of maybe some of the bigger names out there, ChargePoint, EVgo, Electrify America, even Tesla. And we do some of that stuff, installing hardware and charging cars, things like that. The magic of this industry is not in the hardware, it's in the connective tissue, the software that makes these systems work, both at the pump, so to speak, but also between all of the stakeholders, that being utility grids, being smart cities, drivers, fleets, you name it. And so what GoStation really is a software company that develops operating systems to connect those things. So what I like to say for the uninitiated is that we're sort of at the twilight of what I've been calling EV charging 1.0 and the dawn of EV charging 2.0. And each has its defining characteristics, but the defining characteristics going forward are really about efficient deployment of hardware, the efficient management of hardware, the exchange of data, tying into environmental assets like carbon credits and renewable energy credits, the intelligent generation and distribution and storage of energy. It's really some complex stuff. But the hardware itself, the chargers that are out there, it's just power. I don't want to oversimplify it, but it's just power electronics stuff. We've been doing that as a society, as technologists, as businesses for a century. Yeah, there may be some more intelligent ways that we can manage the hardware, but it's really in making these systems speak to each other and work in concert.
I think that there's a lot of misunderstandings around this, and you and I had talked about this in a previous conversation, and I want to bring it up here because I think it needs to come to the surface. When Tesla sort of launched, and then we started getting these charging stations, they were mostly put in California and up the coast there initially. Now, of course, they're everywhere, and a lot of them seem to be pretty bad. They look good, but they were pretty bad. So there's that side of it. And then there's the other side of it, which is the idea of clean energy dependent upon a dirty energy grid. So which one of those two parts do you want to start with?
Let's start with, at least to begin with, is this conception that chargers are everywhere. I will say that they're much more widespread than they were before.
Yep.
Not nearly as widespread, and especially not as intelligently placed as they need to be. Mm-hmm. And I think that goes back to, if you do a sort of an analysis of the maturation of the industry, you've got sort of carpet bomb approaches. to distribution. And we're in 2025. Everything needs to be a scalpel, needs to be precise, needs to be data driven. It really can't be, oh, there's some space out behind the dumpster. Let's put it there. It needs to be designed with intention, and these need to be safe, reliable places for people to go. And they need to be the right speeds. And again, a lot of that has to do with hardware, but most of it has to do with business models, data, ties into the grid, et cetera. Maybe that's a good segue to the second part of your question.
Before you go on to the second part,
Yeah.
what's been the most common mistake? I'm sure people have got their own biases, and let's just point out some of the mistakes so they can say, oh, yeah, okay, I think that that's the problem. And then we can talk about the evolution.
I think widespread or well-known mistake and one not so well-known. One well-known mistake is that the placement of these things is an afterthought. In other words, you've got really well-known brands with good speeds, fast chargers, but they're out at the end of a parking lot. It's not planned into a development. Traffic flows aren't good. And then, of course, the reliability issue that you mentioned earlier. Another maybe not so well-known mistake is a really large emphasis on slow chargers. There's probably about 150,000 public charging ports in the US, maybe 175. And it's been something like 80% are what are called level 2 or slower. That's generally functionally obsolete for many use cases. For some cases where a vehicle is domiciled for a long time, overnight, maybe at the airport, et cetera, then it is the right use case, right? It's the most empathetic to the grid. You don't need fast chargers in many use cases. But for the way that Americans drive their vehicles, we need far more fast chargers. The problem is we're not building them the way we need them built. We're just sort of slapping them out there in parking lots. And then the management systems are not as integrated to our vehicle control systems, our grid management systems, our safety systems like stoplights, our emergency management systems. Those are the systems that need to speak to each other.
So let's take that into the next part, which is this idea of clean energy from a dirty grid. And for those who are not clear about what I mean by that is we've been sold this idea of electric vehicles, etc., being clean energy, but oftentimes, particularly in the United States, we're plugging those into a system, a grid that is often run on coal or on other dirty power that, oh, well, how does that work out? And on top of it being dirty powered, oftentimes those grids are in very poor disrepair and old and ready to fall apart. And we're putting a lot of strain on them that may, in fact, damage the general output of electricity from that grid.
I couldn't agree more. While I wish I could snap my fingers and solve the dirty generation problem, I can't. I think the answer, my humble opinion, is that it's a mix of modern generation technologies, certainly renewables, wind, solar, hydro, et cetera, but it's also much more intelligent investment and development around nuclear, maybe hydrogen, et cetera. But also, I think one thing that maybe touches on the old grid comment that you made is America's grid, I'll say, is 70 years behind Germany's, for example. But it's not all bad. I think we have an opportunity to maybe reinvent the way that we build a grid or modernize a grid based on a lot more knowledge about what electrical demand is going to look like into the future. It's not just mobility and EVs. A big power hog is AI and a lot of changes to the way that we're going to need energy. I'm really excited about, as a car guy, I'm learning a lot about the energy space, but I'm really excited about the idea of sort of a distributed network of generation, renewable or otherwise, that puts generation a lot closer to load or to demand. It's sort of like urban farming, right? You can create a lot of efficiencies by moving production of healthy foods closer to where it's needed, like rooftops in New York City. It's the same sort of idea with energy generation. Get it closer to where it's needed.
So neighborhood energy farming.
Yeah. So like microgrids is the term everybody knows, but we can tease out a lot from that concept to build a grid that's really resilient and adaptable as our energy needs grow, but also where we need the energy and when is a real big hurdle.
Well, as you said, your technology is not just about transportation, but I think that most people don't really understand how much energy AI is taking. Like they have no idea. It's massive, 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 massive. And if you're paying your $20 to Chat GPT or whoever it might be, that energy level for it to produce what it produces isn't happening free because it happens quick on your computer. At an energy level, the cost is enormous, enormous. And in the present form is not sustainable with the grid we have and how things are operational. So is your company trying to confront that challenge?
We are. And in fact, going back to the dirty grid concept, you've got a lot of these folks that are investing billions of dollars into AI and data centers, et cetera, making also ESG commitments that they will fuel that, if you will, or power that with clean energy, sort of a net zero commitment. The problem with that is, to your point, they're buying kilowatt hours from the grid as is, but also buying carbon credits or renewable energy certificates or whatever to offset their impact, which, by the way, that marketplace is really interesting and compelling and still in its infancy. Years ago, I put a Post-it note on my computer monitor that said, democratize the carbon credit, because the first quarters that Tesla was reporting a profit. They weren't reporting a profit on a unit basis for their cars. They were doing it by selling tens of millions of carbon credits. What they were doing then, though, is they were producing millions of credits at a time and selling millions of credits at a time to large off-takers like oil companies. But in the middle, there were a lot of engineers and lawyers and accountants facilitating that, quantifying the credits, validating the credits, pricing the credits, completing the paperwork in a transaction. And it was bulky. Only big organizations could do it infrequently.
And it also sounds a little like a scam.
Maybe. But I think what's really interesting is, for example, the individuals creating that offset, that environmental offset by buying and driving an electric vehicle versus driving a gas or diesel vehicle weren't benefiting from that transaction. And so that was the motivation for my Post-it note, which is, how do we take this tangible benefit and benefit those that are actually creating the offset, the benefit? The answer really is in this technology play that you're describing with AI and everything else. It's blockchain, right? How do we put it on the blockchain and create smart contracts and take all of those human beings out of the middle and make business sense when you're talking about slivers of a penny, not tens of millions of dollars at a time? And if you do that, man, there's a lot of benefit, a lot of opportunity, a lot of money involved. And so we've done that. We've built a blockchain fueled capability to say, hey, look, you're creating this sustainable asset, if you will, or this environmental offset by charging your vehicle or putting solar on your roof or buying wind, et cetera, et cetera. Let's make it so that this is a tangible benefit to you. It may only be a few pennies at a time, but they deserve it. And so that's sort of an exciting emerging marketplace that's only getting started. It's a multi-trillion-dollar opportunity going forward. It's part of this sort of dawn of 2.0. It's not just EV charging 2.0, it's energy 2.0, which is really exciting.
I think that on the surface of it, people think of things like, well, there's electric cars and I plug it in and I get it charged. And I'm doing better for the environment because I'm not putting gas in the car or petrol in the car. And I'm not saying that's wrong or right. I'm just saying that's what it is. But there's much more complexities to it in the way that you're talking about it. What do we need to understand? What does the average, in America at least, the average EV driver, the Tesla driver, need to understand that they don't understand? Because of course there's pushback on the amount of carbon balance is not really there when you look at the production of a battery and the waste of that battery, and it can't be recycled, and et cetera, et cetera. Is it really saving anything? And we've got a lot of pushback on the whole EV thing, certainly in the last 5 years. Let's just go with that.
Well, in the US, certainly since November. But yeah, I think you make some really good points, and GoStation and our related businesses and activities focus on just a little piece of this. But look, there's some really exciting businesses emerging around battery development, battery recycling, Some former Tesla guys have formed a company called Redwood, which is recycling batteries for all kinds of different use cases, which is exactly what needs to happen. When you think about, let's just say the automobile from a gas and diesel perspective, like in 1905, you could buy a steam powered car or an electric car or a diesel car or whatever. It really was wide open. Henry Ford made it more practical, more affordable, and accessible to buy one style. And we've been building that one style of automobile for 100 plus years because of Henry Ford. But man, vehicles today that are gas, for example, let's just pick the most popular vehicle for the last 60 years in America is the F-Series pickup. So F-150. I could go out today and get a turbocharged 6-cylinder F-150 that can tow 13,000 pounds and I could get 20 plus miles to the gallon. You couldn't do that in 1921. And so we are still pretty early in the technology sort of S-curve for electric vehicles. And so it's a little bit unfair to judge the maturation of this life cycle of products from lithium mining to battery manufacturing to vehicle manufacturing to recycling to everything else against 100 years of refinement. But we'll get there. The good news is that technology S-curves are a lot tighter in 2025 than they were in 1921. And so we're seeing leaps of progress every quarter, really, which is why this is a really exciting time to be working on what we're working on.
I think also there's the maybe naivete of the American public. They think of electric cars, they think of Tesla. And there's no doubt that Elon Musk globally, and indeed certainly in the US, transformed the electric car industry. There's no doubt about that. But he doesn't own that game at all. Do you see the impact on the demand for EVs, which has certainly gone into some fluctuation in the last few years? Do you see that impact on the demand for EVs? Do you think it's going to have any shift because people who were seeing Elon Musk, for instance, as this insanely innovative entrepreneur who has suddenly become this politically divisive figure? Do you think that that factors in at all?
It's certainly impacting Tesla. I think they just announced their European sales figures are way down. I think they're going to announce that the US sales figures are way down. And so the market cap has taken a big hit. But again, what's exciting about the space, and what I'll say is let's back out of EVs alone, but transportation, mobility, automotive, that's really exciting is we are sort of the frog in the boiling water a little bit in the second major technology transformation in the sector. The first is Henry Ford. The second is what we're living through now, which is a real rethinking of technology around vehicles. And it's not just propulsion technology, like whether it's a battery electric vehicle or gas or diesel. Really, cars are becoming computers on wheels. There are autonomous vehicles, there's micro-mobility, there's a shift in aviation with personal aviation devices, whether they're man-sized drones or air taxis, or they're even small drones that are used for package delivery or anything else. There's a real shift across the board, which is really exciting. And so one of the things that I always get hisses and scoffs at state legislatures or something when I'm invited to speak, because I say, at the outset, I'm not an EV evangelist. I'm not going to tell you that EV is the right technology for every use case because it's just not. And so anybody that would have said, for example, GM a year ago or 2 years ago or 3 years ago that said, we're going to go 100% electric, I would have said, well, that's pretty aggressive. Let's commit to modernizing systems and see where the marketplace takes us. So going back to your environmental motivation, I think, not to be crass, but these things have to make good business sense. Otherwise, they're not going to survive. And so when you have a family that can go into a Chevy dealership or a Ford dealership, and they can look at the Tahoe or the F-150 they want to buy, and there's a gas and there's an electric and maybe there's hydrogen someday, and they can make their choice. They can say, here is the cost to buy, here's the cost to operate, here's the ownership experience, here's the driving experience. There's going to be technologies that win out. But across all of those choices, we're going to see dramatic modernization in systems. So for example, today in that F-150, you've got hundreds of disparate siloed systems. You've got suppliers like Bosch and Sony and McLaren Automotive and you name it. And those systems don't talk to each other and oftentimes don't share data with Ford. Well, Ford and the Ford family, led by Bill Ford, the chairman of Ford Motor Company, have bought this beautiful old building in Detroit called the Detroit Michigan Central Station. It's an old train station. It's a beautiful old building. And they've renovated it, spent millions of dollars, and it is now the tech hub for Ford Motor Company, but Detroit at large. And they're insourcing all of this stuff. So they're starting to generate their own teams to write software or contract with manufacturers or suppliers in different ways to supply chips and so on and so forth. But they're recognizing that a massive shift has to happen from the way that we've built these things for decades to the way that we need to be building them going forward. And it's really all about data sharing, and sort of live monitoring of these things. So back to the family and the dealership, no matter what you choose, gas, electric, pixie dust, that's going to be the theme of transportation going forward, which is really, really exciting. And electrification is going to be a big part of that, but it's not going to be 100%.
Yeah, there's a lot to go into there and a lot more we can open up into, including the fact that companies like Toyota have pulled away from electric and are now heavily investing in hydrogen. And that's just one. There's many others too. We're going to talk more about that in part 2 of the show. Before we go anywhere, though, I want to make sure that people know how to find out more about you, Andrew, and about your company. So please tell people where they can find out about you, the organization, and all of the resources.
Yeah, well, I'd love to talk to anybody that plays in this space. I'm always excited to network and learn more from folks working on this stuff. But they can find me on LinkedIn is probably the best place. Just search my name, Andrew Hisey. And then GoStation, our website is go-station.com. And we're on LinkedIn on the company side as well.
And we'll make sure, of course, that those links are published on the show notes. So if for some reason you want them and you didn't get them, don't worry, they'll be there. We're going to be back in just one click for more of our delicious conversation with Andrew Hisey and of GoStation. So stay curious, my friends. Stay curious about how you're looking at renewable energy and transportation. And maybe you need to open up that lens a little bit more because there's a lot more to it than we might have originally thought. Stay curious. We'll see you in one click.